And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Each year, St. John Ambulance trains over 65,000 students in life-saving first aid skills so they can confidently take action and give aid during an emergency or severe injury at their workplace, at their home, or out in their community. On today's Open Connection, we speak to one of the organization's historians, Nick Hume.
Going back to ancient times in the 11th century, we actually had our first clinic, our first hostel, not hospital, but back in those times, a hostel and a hospital served similar functions. It was a safe place for people to go and get care and food, but was supported by one of the local churches dedicated to St. John. So it was the St. John hostel, or the Order of St. John, that was where that care was being provided. And so we've kept that name for 940 odd years now. But yeah, everyone calls us St. John's. And it's not, it's St. John, or the St. John Ambulance, or St. John Ambulance. I'm a born and raised island kid, actually. It seems like Victoria is full of people who have come here from elsewhere. And I was actually born and raised in Victoria. I was born at the Royal Jubilee Hospital here in Victoria. And I spent pretty much my entire life here. I've been very lucky. I've spent a number of years overseas in a whole bunch of different places. I've been able to live in a couple other places, but I've always been able to come home to the island.
What did you decide to do for when it came to schooling, and what did you do after school?
So I did all of my primary education, all my junior, middle, high school education, also here in Victoria, or I attended St. Michael's University School, which is a local private school. And then I have a bit of a winding path through academia after that. I started studying criminal justice for a year, and then I went and did a couple of years at Camosun College, and then I went and did a couple of years of political science at the University of Victoria. I actually dropped out for several years. I ended up working as a photojournalist, doing news photography, primarily for newspapers, a few magazines, for quite some time. And then ended up going traveling for a couple of years. I spent 2 years circumnavigating the globe over land and sea. I went back into the Department of Anthropology at UVic, and ended up finishing with an undergraduate degree in social sciences. So that's where I am now, and I'm actually just in the process of returning for some continuing education in museum and archival studies, also at UVic. I'm starting that in a couple months. I'm very excited about that as well.
And why did you choose anthropology as a major?
I lived in Thailand for half a year, and I was doing a lot of underwater diving, scuba diving, and doing a lot of wreck exploration. And I really enjoyed being able to go and look at some of these shipwrecks that were, in some cases 700, 800, 900 years old. And I was doing it as a tourist with no real understanding of what. No real understanding of anything. I thought, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm looking at this thing. And I decided I wanted to go and learn a little bit more about that. So I actually entered the Department of Anthropology at UVic intending to focus on archaeology. And then I left or graduated having focused much more on physical anthropology and biological anthropology, which then fed into my career as a paramedic, which is what I do for a living now. I'm a paramedic with the ambulance service. So it's a bit of a winding path, but it's been an interesting ride.
And of course, as a paramedic, you're that first one on the scene when it comes to people needing help. Did you find that understanding people with your background in anthropology and your world traveling kind of helped you connect with those first vital few seconds when you're meeting with someone who's in help or needs help?
You're the first person that's ever asked me that question and has recognized that would be an asset. I think, yes, actually. I think it's been a huge part, more so the time overseas than the time at UVic, to be quite honest. I learned a lot when I was traveling about what it's like to be in a vulnerable situation and to have someone be kind to you.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thanks for staying with us. St. John Ambulance first documented training branch was opened on May 1911 in Victoria. Today, the charity has 19 branches that run both first aid courses and volunteer training and orientation sessions. Let us return to the conversation as Nick Yoon shares how he became interested in history.
I've always had a real interest in history. My going back to my childhood, even my dad's also a journalist and always had a great interest in history. And I think he sort of, growing up with him, he helped focus my interest a little bit towards always asking one more question. Always, well, what's the background on that? What's the context on that? And so, I think it wasn't maybe necessarily the anthropology specifically that did that with St. John, but it was that background from Dad that, when I show up somewhere and anywhere, St. John was a good example. I've been with the organization for about 10 years now, or just coming up on my 10-year anniversary, and starting to ask a little bit about like, oh, well, St. John Ambulance has been around for a long time. How long have we been around for? And then someone says, the answer is always, well, they've been around for about 100 years in Canada, but there's a long history before that. Well, first off, 100 years is actually quite a long time by most people's standards. And second off, what do you mean there's a long history before that? Wait a second, right? And then down the rabbit hole you go, and you start, I started reading a little bit, reading what I could, learning a little bit more about the history of the organization. And then I guess about 3 years ago, 2018, my partner, my life partner, you could call her my wife, I guess, is the superintendent for Victoria or for superintendent for St. John Ambulance in Victoria. And we were on vacation in the UK, and we were visiting the St. John Museum at St. John Gate in Clerkenwell in London. And we're going through the St. John Roll of Honor for people who were killed in action in World War I. And St. John provided a lot of medical care and a lot of medical support during both World Wars and a lot of other conflicts. But in World War I, we lost just over 1,100 of our members over the course of the war. And so my partner Anna was going through this and said, who's this person from British Columbia, Dorothy Twist? I don't know anything about. How do we live in a province where we don't know anything about this person who died in World War I? Dorothy was this woman who came over from the UK just before World War I. Ended up working as a clerk, a typewriting clerk at a local bank back when typewriting was a really specialized skill. Not everyone knew how to type, and she actually was so anxious to help with the war effort that she trained up with us. And before St. John was even officially sending voluntary aid detachment members over, which happened about 1.5 years, 2 years into the war, Dorothy trained with us, signed up, paid for her own ticket to England, signed up with the Red Cross St. John, which were a little bit more developed in their sending of resources, did a tour working as both a clerk and we think doing nursing work in Switzerland. She came back for a year, and then she signed up for a second tour, and then we sent her over a second time, and it was during her second tour that she actually contracted Spanish flu and died in 1918, in September 1918. And it was regarded highly enough at the time that she was buried with full military honors. This civilian typewriting clerk from Victoria, BC. And if you have any viewers who ever make it up to Cobble Hill on Vancouver Island or up to Duncan, she's the only woman on either cenotaph there. Her family lived in Cobble Hill, so her place of residence of record is Cobble Hill, and so she's up there as well.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. St. John Ambulance is a 900-year-old humanitarian organization. The charity has operated in British Columbia since 1911 with a mission to improve people's health, safety, and quality of life. The charity trains over 65,000 students in BC and Yukon each year in first aid and CPR. Let us return to the conversation as Nick shares some of the items in the organization's museum.
We have a current mandate to provide first aid training, first aid services, medical first response, therapy dogs, youth leadership programs to the people of British Columbia. That's a big full-time task. We train tens of thousands of people a year. Our volunteers perform tens of thousands of hours of community service every year. I don't have those numbers right in front of me right now, the actual ones for last year. COVID's obviously impacted things, but we're a very busy organization day to day. And so, I'm very lucky in that I'll normally run into other history nerds somewhere along the way, and other people who have walked down the same path before me. Our current leadership, our current director of community services, woman named Jane Short, is fantastically supportive, and we do actually have a small St. John museum in Vancouver in the basement of our headquarters on Canby Street. It's been neglected for about 10 or 15 years now. The previous, I think I mean this with a great deal of respect, but the previous historians and history nerds and museum folks, a couple people passed away, a couple people had other priorities, I think. And so we have this fantastic museum that's currently not open to the public. And so one of our priorities, we're having great support from the organization with this, is to try and get that reorganized, resort our archives a little bit and be able to open that space to the public, which I'm really looking forward to as well.
And of course, when you have an organization that has the history that St. John's does, what are some of the things that you kind of found out about it, or an item that you picked up and you go, wow, I didn't know this existed?
This is perfect because I was actually Googling your name, Robert, earlier today to try and learn a little bit about you before and I saw some references to beading, or some family beading. And so the last time I was over in Vancouver in the museum, we were actually going through and trying to sort some collections. We found this fantastic piece of Métis beadwork from up in the Northwest Territories. And it was actually done in the shape of a St. John cross, or St. John Ambulance logo. It looks like it's from about the 50s or so. It's described as a black and white circle as beadwork. The lions and unicorns are gold thread. The white cross is made of porcupine quills, and the maple leaves are of dyed moose hair. And it took 6 months to complete. And we have no information about this. It was tucked into a corner, and from what I can tell, largely forgotten about. And so, that going down, it took me going down the road of trying to figure out and learn about that has been fascinating. So I actually found out just recently that Mrs. For those of you, and you'll be forgiven for this, for those of you not familiar with Fort Providence, Northwest Territory, I believe they have a population of about 600 people or something. Like, it's not a large town. So it wasn't hard to track down a name or two. And so we found out with the help of a couple of former locals that Mrs. Angus MacLeod, because of course this is a problem for us in history as well, is that for a very long time in European cultures, women would often be referred to as Mrs. and then their husband's name, which is absolutely infuriating on so many levels, both from being able to do historical research and also just basic gender equality and identifying people for who they are. So I did a little bit of digging. It turns out Mrs. MacLeod was Mrs. Rosemary Florestine MacLeod. And we're still working on getting a little bit more history about what her association with the organization was, because we still don't know. But things like that, are, physical items that pop up that come out of nowhere. One of my other interests is, some of your readers may or may not have seen these first aid to the injured books. So these were the foundation of what we know as modern first aid. The idea of first aid wasn't really a thing. If you look at newspaper accounts from the late 1800s, even into the early 1900s, the Times columnist in Victoria even has first aid, and they put quotes around first aid because it wasn't a thing where we invented the term. But these were the books that were initially the course textbook for the course First Aid to the Injured, which was taught in 5 or 6, depending, 5 or 6 lectures, that people could come and learn how to provide basic first aid to people. And this sort of came out of originally some of the British colonial conflicts in the late 1800s, and there was a recognition that battlefield first aid could be very helpful and stuff. And then at some point, some of the people involved with St. John said, well, we should teach this to the public as well. This would be very useful for people in industrial environments, for people working in factories and rail yards and things like this. So it was really the Industrial Revolution or the tail end of the Industrial Revolution, where we managed to find a niche where that skill set could be really used. And from there, things expanded. Now we see, basic first aid being a thing that really everybody at some point, or almost everybody at some point, takes a first aid course or two. And we've moved from teaching primarily traumatic and workplace related injuries and battlefield injuries to obviously everything else, right? But even in these, I won't dig through this right now, but you can find in some of the later pages, you can find some of the early attempts at resuscitation, early versions of what we would now call CPR, which certainly did not appear to be effective based on what I see in this, at least, right? But again, we're talking about the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then moving forward. This was First Aid to the Injured was the standard textbook for the St. John First Aid course until into the 1950s. I want to say 1954, 1956, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then we transitioned to sort of the more modern format of paperbacks and hardcover books and larger books and stuff like that. But you'll see tons of these little First Aid to the Injured books around. They were printed in the millions in World War I and II. They were issued to, or similar copies were issued to much of the Canadian Expeditionary Force going overseas, who did their first aid training with us as well. And so, in terms of physical artifacts that really grabbed me, these little books are everywhere. You find them all over the place. You find them in used bookstores. You find them in your grandpa's suitcase. You find them in the closet of your parents' place. And they really have a fascinating little story to tell. So,
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
In June 1887, physician James Cantley gave St. John's first public demonstration in first aid at the Medical Congress and Exhibition held in South Kensington. It was a last-minute affair, and Cantley later confessed he did not know what constituted as an ambulance demonstration. In his final segment of Open Connection, Nick shares how St. John's Ambulance continues to help humanity.
I'd say some of the World War I stuff has been the most present in my research and in my work for the last little while. Certainly, again, the Dorothy Pearson Twist story really grabbed me. And in working to understand Dorothy's story a lot more, I also had to go and understand all of the other stuff around that and how the organization functioned back then, and how we were sending people overseas and who was getting and all this sort of stuff. I do have a standing interest in a lot of our ancient history as well. A lot of our stuff going back to the 11th century. The catch with that is that, as with anything from that time period, we have our archives here in Victoria and Vancouver, and I can go and read I can go and find our actual first minutes book from the first group meeting when the organization was founded in BC in 1911. And we actually, I think I have it actually tucked. I'm not going to go looking for it right now, but it's in a box beside me somewhere right now. But being able to look at that and to really look at like the foundations of the organization in British Columbia has been really neat, because that, we're founded in BC in 1911. Within 2.5 years, World War I starts. And that was such a foundational period of time for St. John here in British Columbia that it's to me an area of focus right now. I think there's a lot of neat stories to be told in there. One of the things that we do is we've provided a lot of disaster relief services over the years, including in times of flood, including times of wildfires. The 2017 wildfire season was really quite something. We actually helped our staff in Kamloops helped staff one of the reception centers there for over 100 days, 24 hours a day. I feel like it was 113 days or something like that. We're all seeing the news. We're all expecting this to be another, hopefully not, but we're expecting this to be a busy fire season. And we're sort of spinning up to be prepared, or to try and be as prepared as we can be for that as well. A lot of people don't realize that we're a charity. A lot of people think that we're a business. They think that we're the St. John First Aid people. They have a storefront. They must be a business, and we're not. We're a registered charity, and all of the money that people spend taking their first aid course through us goes to A, providing more first aid services, and B, into funding those community programs as medical first responders. So when you're taking your first aid course from us, that's in turn going to help to fund the community programs that are going out to provide first aid at music festivals during wildfire season, really wherever else we're needed, as well as to fund our therapy dog programs, who take therapy dogs to provide comfort in literally everything from old folks' homes, right up to I believe some of our dog teams were going into some local prisons and jails, and also to provide support for our youth programs and stuff. So we have cadet programs for kids age 6 to 18 to learn youth leadership and first aid skills, and all of these things are funded by we have grants from government and from private sources as well, but all the money that you spend taking your first aid course with us goes into providing those services as well. So that's a really big thing. We do always have a need for more volunteers for our medical first responder programs. Anyone you ever see wearing a white uniform like the one I'm wearing right now is a volunteer. None of our instructors who teach first aid are paid staff, but everyone who you see out at community events in a white shirt, or sometimes in black t-shirts if it's a hot day, all of those people are volunteer medical first responders. If you're interested in volunteering with us, sja.ca is the place to go, and you can click through to our volunteer with us link there.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.